Yeah. Look, here, let me show you what I. So this is my. This is. So I don't know. So I don't know, it's going to like how much really will be taxed on what's going on.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see you today in our kind of last regular class before our culture fair. So Wednesday, of course, we're having our culture fair assignments. Hopefully everybody has been working on their flyer, on the research for their flyer, and has been figuring that out. Questions about that assignment? Anything you're not sure about? You guys feel pretty okay about it?
You go on both sides, so.
Yeah, front and back, one sheet. Yeah. That's what you're going to do. Yeah, from back of one sheet. Other questions about the culture fair flyer and process? Yes.
Is the formatting just like a sheet of paper, like 8 and 5?
Yeah. Yeah, I figure that's the easiest for you guys to handle. Yeah. Other queries? So as I mentioned before, as a last resort, I can print things for you if you send them to me by 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday, but that really is a last resort. I cannot guarantee that our department copier will be working. I feel like every other day I spend a significant amount of time fighting with that copier. So it really is a last resort. I've pinned on Canvas a list of all the locations where you guys can print stuff on campus and a link to the directions for how to do that. If you've never printed before on campus, give yourself a little extra time to fight with the unnecessarily complicated system, right? But it should be something you guys are mostly able to do to print your flyers. Okay, I'll be bringing food, so hopefully that will be tasty for everybody and we'll be able to have a nice time on Wednesday. As we mentioned before, feel free to bring music if you're doing a musician or bring additional snacks to share if you would like to, anything like that. All right. Other housekeeping things. In terms of our course evaluation will be open from Wednesday through Friday. If you do the course evaluation, you can then come back over to Canvas, and there's a little tiny assignment there where you can just say, I did the course evaluation, and you can get a point of extra credit. So just because I appreciate you guys for answering questions. When you do the course evaluation, I would especially like to know if there are any speakers that you really liked that you want us to make sure we invite back next year, if there are any topics you really hoped we would cover that we didn't, or anything of that variety. I don't really care about the part where you're like choosing numbers. You're like, it was a 4 out of 5 or a 3 out of 5. I don't care about it. I just really care about the part at the end where you can like make suggestions and give a bit more feedback. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right. So today, I wanted to start out by sort of doing the PR thing. If you enjoyed this class, if you want to take more classes from me, these are the classes that I'm teaching in the next 3 quarters. They're not necessarily super similar to this class. This is kind of the weirdest class for me as a professor. I will particularly point out a couple of these. In spring, I'm teaching From Israelites to Jews, 586 BC to 70 CE. We read a lot of primary sources and we just kind of talk through what's going on, kind of historically and religiously and socially, and it's usually a really good time. And then I'll point out next fall, I'm teaching women in the ancient Middle East, which again is a really fun course. We look at a lot of primary sources, we look at a lot of archaeological evidence, and we kind of just see what's going on there. All right. If you want to take other classes about Middle Eastern languages and cultures, these are the ones coming up in winter. A lot of these are by people who guest lectured for us this quarter, so you kind of already know what they would be like as a professor. So that is kind of helpful. So these are those courses there. If you want to know what's going on with MELC farther out than 1 quarter, we actually have a place on our website where we have what's called a 3-quarter planner, where we're trying to project what we're doing a little bit farther in advance. So you can look there and you can always find out what we think we're doing in spring and sometimes even like next fall or something like that. We will try to have that information up. I also want to point out to you guys, if any of you would like, we start a lot of different Middle Eastern languages in the fall every year. So if you would like to start Biblical Hebrew with me, for example, we'll be starting that next fall. And then, of course, every year you can always start Persian, Modern Hebrew, Arabic, Turkish. Those are always available starting in fall. Ancient Egyptian, we have every 2 to 3 years, and it looks like next fall is the next time we'll do a sequence of it. And we also have a wide variety of other languages that are sometimes available. Just to point this out to you guys, if any of you guys are interested in minoring in Middle Eastern studies, it's not a huge minor, and you've already completed Gateway, so you've already done some of the classes you would need for this minor. The general Middle Eastern Studies minor, you can see the requirements there. We also have language-based minors in a variety of Middle Eastern languages. And I'll also point out that this class is a basic requirement for our MELC majors as well. A lot of people do a MELC major as their second major, just because they're interested in it or they're connected with it. So those options are there. Any questions about any of that? Okay. So what are we going to do today? We're going to do some course reflections, and we're going to kind of try to see what we remember. And we're also, as we go through this, we're going to be thinking about what we've learned and kind of what we want to take away with us at the end of this class. So here is a picture of beautiful Cairo in Egypt. Can you imagine living right next to the Great Pyramids? That would be wild. Anyway, okay, so what we're going to do, you're going to need this handout sheet. There should be some up on the chair, there's some down here. And for these questions, what we're going to do is I'm sometimes going to ask you some questions that I want you to kind of write down what you remember. As you do this, you are welcome to talk to your neighbor about it, but I would like you to not look at your notes. Okay, it's kind of like what's in your brain and what can we kind of, what's in all of our brains kind of thing. Here. Does that make sense? I'm not grading this as a quiz or anything, even though it's called a quiz bowl. It's just kind of to see what we've got in our brains. Okay. All right. So first question, question 1, what countries are usually described as being in the Middle East? Go ahead and try to list as many as you can. Feel free to talk to your neighbor if you need help. If you're done, check with your neighbor, see if you have the same number of countries and if you have the same countries.
I said it. Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, sometimes Cyprus. So 50 or 60. Should I listen it out?
How many countries did you guys get in your list?
16.
Okay, I hear a 12, I hear a 16, 19. So depending on, obviously, we talked about how the Middle East is like a wobbly term, right? If you get around 15 to 17, then you're doing really well. Depending on how you count it, it may be more. So we have all these different countries, including a lot of kind of small countries that I feel like we forget about if we don't live there. So we've got UAE and Qatar and Kuwait. We've got Cyprus that's sometimes included. We've got a lot of these different countries, Yemen and Oman. So this is about what we have here. Now, so we remember this. What about the Horn of Africa and Central Asia? Try to put that under number 2. Feel free to talk to your neighbor again. Check with your neighbor, see if you have the same answers.
Yeah. I think it's more simple. Yeah, I feel usually. Yeah. Yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
Okay, who can help me out? How many countries in the Horn of Africa? Show me on your fingers. Everybody show me on your fingers. How many countries in the Horn of Africa? Okay, seeing a lot of 4s, seeing some 5s, occasionally other numbers. Okay, so what are the countries in the Horn of Africa? Yell one out for me. Somalia, what's another one? Eritrea, what's another one? Djibouti and Ethiopia, yes. So usually that's kind of what we include in Horn of Africa. Sometimes people will also include Sudan and South Sudan. it's really weird to me that neither the Middle East, as it's usually defined, or the Horn of Africa, as it's usually defined, includes Sudan. I'm like, what is Sudan supposed to do? Anyway, so these are our Horn of Africa countries. What about Central Asia? Central Asia. What are the how many countries in Central Asia?
6.
Okay, maybe 6. Maybe 5. I'm seeing some different numbers held up. Okay, what are some countries that are in Central Asia? Yell one out for me.
Pakistan.
Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, yeah. Turkmenistan. Pardon?
Kyrgyzstan.
Kyrgyzstan, yes. There's another one. Kazakhstan, yes. So usually that is what we include in Central Asia. Obviously, again, it's kind of a wobbly term. So these are the areas that we've talked about during our year here. So here, I don't want you to write anything. I want you to remind yourself, why does the term Middle East not make us happy? And do you guys have an alternative? Like, what do you think would be a better way for people from outside this area to refer to the cultures of this region? Do you guys have a solution? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Yes.
That's not.
Yeah. It was in Southwest Asia.
What do y'all think about this? Why is the Middle East a problem? Someone quickly remind us. Why is that term kind of yeah.
It's kind of representing the people exactly. Like Middle East, it refers like east to what? So it's a problem because like Europe is trying to be in a central place in the world.
Yeah. So it's a term that's very much defining the Middle East as being kind of east of Europe, and like this is where it is in relation to Europe. And so it's actually a Eurocentric term. So that's not super great. What else? What other issue do we have with this term? Yeah.
It groups a lot of diverse people who believe different things and different cultures into single designation.
Yes. It's also grouping a lot of people who are believing all sorts of things, all sorts of different groups, and sort of grouping them together, which can be dangerous when people from outside of the Middle East are like, oh, the Middle East says this, or the Middle East does that, or the Middle East believes this, and starts treating it as this like monolithic region where everything is the same, no matter where you are or who you are. So that's not great. So what do you guys think? Are there better options for how we can refer to the cultures of this region? Yeah.
One thing I would say, especially in recent years, was Southwest Asia instead of Middle East. People say Southwest Asia, North Africa, or West Asia, and then Southwest Asia is kind of like in the area of the Arabian Peninsula. So that's what I heard. I think that's like probably a better term because it's more in line with how we discussed other parts of Asia, like South Asia, East Asia, Central Asia. So Middle East is not the Middle East, but it's West Asia.
Okay, so we could call it West Asia, which is a somewhat more neutral term. Although I will say the whole thing where Asia and Europe got split and labeled was a Eurocentric thing that originally happened, but we've forgotten about that. So we're pretending that's not Eurocentric. But yes, it's calling it West Asia, Southwest Asia is maybe a little more neutral. Any other options? Yeah.
Provide linguistic bounds. Do that in the Western world, again, using the European centered model. We have Anglophonic countries, we have Francophonic countries. So like their language family or like their cultural, general like cultural background that you can like use to like separate different people.
Okay, so maybe we could try using their kind of language family, or we could try using their cultural backgrounds to refer to this. Maybe we could try that. Any other suggestions? Anyone just want to reject the whole thing and just be like, no, we have to refer to the individual countries? I mean, the United States gets referred to individually. So it's like, why do we get that privilege? And like, so few others get to just be referred to as the name of their country. Anyway, so I do think this is something we need to keep thinking about and working on. And it's a very uncomfortable thing for those of us who are faculty in Middle Eastern languages and cultures, because we're all like, what is this? But that's the way the cookie has crumbled in the United States thus far, but it's something to work on. Okay, third question for your page. We know that the Middle East and Horn of Africa are hugely diverse in cultures, religions, languages. So what are some of the major religions and religious groups in these areas? Make a list under number 3. Again, feel free to talk to your neighbor. Tell your neighbor, see if you got any that they didn't get.
Yeah. Putting out his own out. That's the whole thing. It was a nice time. It is.
Okay, what are some of our options? What are some of our religious options? Yes. Yes, some of our big options are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Within Islam, there's obviously a lot of variety. Does anyone remember any of the kind of varieties within Islam? Yes. Yes, Sunni and Shia are kind of the biggest ones, but there are also a lot of smaller Islamic traditions that are less well known. Yeah. How about Christianity? What forms of Christianity might you be most likely to find in the Middle East? What have we talked about? Yes.
In the Horn of Africa, you're gonna have a lot of Coptic or Oriental Orthodox.
Mhm.
It's more diverse kind of as you head into the Middle East.
Mhm.
So you'll have Catholic, Armenian, Christians, Eastern Orthodox, much more hodgepodge.
Yes, yes, that's true. So we get a lot of Orthodox of different varieties. We get a lot of Catholics. We get some of other varieties of Christianity, but there's variety there as well. You mentioned Judaism also. There's also varieties of Judaism. We haven't really had a chance to talk about that much this quarter, but there's a lot of varieties of Judaism as well. Other than Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, other religions you might find. Yeah.
Yazidism by Yazidi Kurds.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Also called al-Haq or some of these other names. So there's a kind of Islam adjacent religion practiced by the Kurds. If you guys remember, we talked about the Kurds when we talked about Turkey. And so they have, let me look at my notes. So it's a combination of like the medieval mystical version of Islam with local Iranian tradition, is kind of how I've seen it described. And there are other options for things you might find in the Middle East as well. Zoroastrianism, the Druze religion is another Islam adjacent religion. So the Druze don't identify as Muslim, but they are monotheistic, but they also believe in reincarnation, and kind of final unification with the cosmos. So it's a combination of some different ideas that's been around for many hundreds of years. We also find various polytheistic belief systems still in the Middle East until today, depending where you are, and many other options. And of course, today there are a lot of people who are also atheistic, right? So if you kind of look at what all are people doing, the majority is Islamic, but as we've said, there's a lot of different variety within Islam. And then there's a lot of people who are practicing a variety of other religions. So here we want to kind of think about what we've talked about. We've talked a lot about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam this quarter from different perspectives and in different ways. So tell your neighbor, what do you guys think these religions have in common? And then what makes them different from one another? What do you think? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Yeah, a lot of obviously
What do you guys think? What do these religions have in common? Yes, Connor.
with Abrahamic religions, they build off one another, right? So Christianity came after Judaism, building on that, and then like historically, Islam came after both and sort of expanded upon what they had said and sort of what they had taught with something new. So they all have, well, in like in terms of the Abrahamic religions, for sure, like a lot of religions like Yazidism and the Druze people like build off of those, right? They sort of take some of their beliefs from those religions. So they're related to one another, like with their origins.
Okay, yes. So these three religions are related to one another. They have a lot of the same sacred text. Generally, they also have additional sacred texts that the others don't share, but they have a lot of the same sacred text tradition. And they're sort of building off of each other in a lot of ways. Okay, what are some other things they share? If you made a giant list of all the religions that have ever existed in the world, what would these three religions share that would put them in the minority? Yeah.
They all believe in a single omnipotent, all-knowing deity.
Yes. So they're monotheistic, so one God, which in the history of the world is really unusual. Like once you start investigating the history of places all over the world, that's a very unusual thing. And they also believe that this God is all powerful and all knowing, which is also really unusual. Like if you look at polytheistic religions, generally, a lot of those deities, they're not present everywhere. They don't know everything. They only know what happens right in front of them. They're quite limited. But these three religions have an unlimited kind of God, which makes them unusual. Anything else you guys think of that they kind of share?
They all like surround like the same stories.
Yeah, so they're all drawing on these kind of a lot of the same stories, a lot of the same people are getting mentioned. That's absolutely true. What then makes these religions different from one another? Why don't we all just merge into one big happy family? Yeah.
I think a lot of them have different views on the nature of God
Mhm.
and how they're going to find salvation.
Okay, yeah, that's absolutely true. So even though they agree that they have a monotheistic kind of unlimited God, there's still disagreement on like exactly how that works, who that God is, and exactly how the problems of the world are going to be fixed, how the bad things they've done are going to be fixed, or how they're going to be fixed, or how the world is going to be fixed. There's disagreement on how that's going to happen. That's true. Other thoughts on how they're different from one another? Okay. So, as we've talked about these different religions, we've seen them interact in a lot of different places and a lot of different ways. So, tell your neighbor one thing that you've learned about how these religions have interacted in a positive way, and one thing you've learned about how they've interacted in a negative way. Tell your neighbor something you remember.
Additionally, we saw like there's
Things like that, but
you know, we should not put some next to it, so that we don't fix it, like, you know, the word people. Like, people allow the thing, Christianity, is of.
Yeah.
It's like, it's something like sort of around safe. One another. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have a favorite thing about how they interacted in a positive way that you learned from this class? Yeah, Connor.
Let's say like, you look at like Jerusalem as like a city where a lot of fact, and even though that city was, like a site of a lot of conflict, it was also like a place where there was, a lot of religious harmony. Throughout history, and people of different Abrahamic religions, all three Abrahamic religions, could look at that city as the holy city and interact with each other, exchange their knowledge, and live in peace with one another. So that's a city where that happened at certain times in history.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So even though we often kind of focus on the conflicts that have happened over Jerusalem, there are also many times in history when people of very diverse religious backgrounds are all there exchanging ideas and living in relative peace. Yeah.
More just an example, I guess, of this. Last I checked, which is a little while ago, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is the Jewish city and the most holy site in all of Christendom, the key to opening it belongs in the hands of a Muslim family. Because the Christian leaders of the Crusades knew that all sects would argue about it, so they put it in someone else's hands as a sign of cooperation.
Yes. Yes. That kind of thing happens a lot. Yes. Any other favorite positive examples? Okay. Someone give me a negative example. Just one. We could multiply them. Just one negative example. Yes. Yeah. Yep. That's a very obvious negative example where the Pope is like, yes, we should go kill those people because they don't believe in it's the same God as us. I'm sure God will be happy that we have done this. Oh boy. Yeah, that's a very obvious negative example. So a lot of the wars in this region end up getting discussed as wars between religions. I don't know how well you guys remember this. Can I just see a quick show of hands? Who was alive in 2001? Okay, I feel very old now. So after 9/11, there was a huge wave of media attention to this region of the world and a lot of discussion of a lot of things. And it was like, oh yes, we're going to Afghanistan to fight the Muslims. And it's like, what are you talking about? And a lot of the wars in the region end up getting discussed as like these religious wars. So to what extent, based on everything we've talked about this quarter, to what extent do you think that's true? Tell your neighbor. Is this true? Is this not true? I know we've talked about this question before back with the Crusades, but now adding on what you've learned about the modern period, what do you think? Tell your neighbor.
Losing like other religious to go and being all this to political party as like when they kind of see people land dogs that are just kind of saying you believe
What do you guys think? Is this sometimes getting claimed when it's not accurate? What are the wars, if they're not always about religion, what are the wars about? Someone yell out for me. What's something it might be about? Resources, power. Yeah, lots of things. Okay, so, oil or trade or metal or water or all these things, like it's usually about the resources, right? And I feel like religion gets dragged into it as an excuse more often than not. Although some leaders in the region genuinely want to fight about religion, that's generally not the main thing that's going on. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about the religious diversity in the Middle East and Horn of Africa. What about the language diversity? On number 4 on your handout, go ahead, list what languages are used in the Middle East and Horn of Africa that you can remember. Obviously, this could be a very long list. Just do your best. And as usual, feel free to talk to your neighbor. tell your neighbors, see if they came up with some languages you didn't.
Like that's. And then it's not very hard. I think there's it's only.
Okay, I feel like we probably know quite a few languages of the Middle East. What about the Horn of Africa, though? I feel like that's more obscure. Someone yell out for me. What's a language of the Horn of Africa?
About
Somali. What's another one? Oromo. Amharic. What's another one? Afar. What's another one?
Tigrinya.
Yeah, Tigrinya, Tigray. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there are many more, right? There are many more. So we already know that the Middle East and Horn of Africa, they're incredibly language diverse. So many different languages. I realize you can't read this at all, but just see how it has all these different pretty colors on it. These are all representing different languages and language families. So there's a lot of different languages in the Middle East. So just to remind you, here's kind of the list that I made. The ones in yellow are the ones you can take here at University of Washington if you want to. Now, we've talked a little bit about this issue of kind of wrestling with picking official languages and how that affects people. I want us to think about that for just a second. This isn't something to write down. Tell your neighbor, what is an official language and why do you think a nation has to choose at least one of them? Start with that. Tell your neighbor what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah. They said like he was literally be one of the people that were heard it. One thing he did was he changed the location of the names of so many locations from their original to like
What do you guys think? Why does a nation kind of have to choose at least one official language? Why even pick one? Why not just let it all happen how it happened?
it'll be too disorganized. And be thinking there, or they'd be like, there's different people speaking.
Okay, so some things might be really disorganized. What in particular is going to be disorganized? It's going to cause significant problems. Yeah.
Probably one of them is the rules of the country or the place, and then the communication between people and the education.
Yes, absolutely. So anything to do with the government, if that's happening in 5 zillion different languages, you know, say that you write a law code and you write it in a language, but it's not an official language, people aren't being educated in that language, half the people can't read the law code, that would be a problem, right? And so any kind of official communication, they have to kind of choose what they're going to do that in. So at least that'll be somewhat unified. Yes. And also you're right that you have to kind of choose what language education will be in or what languages, because if you are doing education in a language, you need enough teachers who know that language. You need enough school resources in that language. This is something I end up thinking about a lot. I grew up in a school district where there was a very significant international population, and there were problems because I would be there in first grade, and about a third of the other students in the classroom were very much second language English speakers, and some of them had only been in America for a year. And so the teacher is asking them to do things and read things, and they don't really understand it, and there wasn't support provided. Like the school was not providing support for this. And so it was not great for those students, right? So, there are some school districts in the United States where you can do your schooling in Spanish, but Spanish and English are pretty much your only options for education in the United States. And Spanish is like pretty limited in where you can get a full education in Spanish. So this is like a very important thing to be thinking about. Anything you guys remember about different struggles we've seen or talked about language rights and policies in the Middle East and Horn of Africa? Yeah, Connor.
So we saw like with, what, Turk was doing in Turkey after the, Ottoman Empire fell. He was trying to make Turkish the official language, and he did this, he cemented this by changing the names of, a lot of towns and locations and cities in the east of Turkey where Armenian and Kurdish were being spoken to Turkish names to sort of cement the national identity. So we saw certain languages and people's, identities being erased to build this new national identity. So that was definitely a point of contention with a lot of Kurdish people.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So we have these issues like once you choose an official language, how far are you going to push that? How far are you going to try to go just beyond educating people in that language, but trying to force people to use that language and force that language to be kind of the only one that's visible in the society? And this becomes something people struggle about. Any other examples anybody can think of? Okay. All right. Let's see here. We've kind of talked about this question, so we're not going to worry about it. So we've seen over the course of the quarter that humans just struggle about a lot of things. It doesn't matter where you live, you're going to struggle about these kinds of things, right? So we've seen examples of people struggling in the Middle East and Horn of Africa over resources of all kinds. So water, oil, metals, food, etc. We've seen them struggling about trade. They want access to the trade routes. They want control of the trade routes. These kinds of things. They want places to live, right? And one of the things, I think at the very first class, we looked a little bit at the geography of the Middle East and the climate of the Middle East, right? We saw how the amount of water that a lot of places in the Middle East get by rainfall is significantly lower than a lot of places in the United States, right? So what this means is, if in America you get a little bit of climate change, people are like, that's annoying, crank up the air conditioning, turn up the heat, maybe my crop won't grow quite as well, maybe I'll switch to another slightly different crop. But when you are in an area where water is more difficult to find, a very slight change in the climate means suddenly a lot of kind of marginal areas are now uninhabitable. A lot of areas for shepherding, you no longer have enough food there for your sheep and your goats. And so everybody is trying to go into a smaller area where there's also less water for farming. And so a lot of people have been moving around for many thousands of years in this region, partly because of that and partly because, of course, of many other factors. And so this is definitely something people struggle over. And of course, there are also struggles over identities. So our rights as humans, as individuals, or as groups to have or practice our various identities, or someone else saying, no, you don't have the right to practice that part of your identity. These are also things that there's struggle over. So as we think about that, let's talk about national identity for just a second. So just someone quickly remind us, how did many of the nations of the Middle East and Horn of Africa get their current borders? Yes.
Like, so, then after the First World War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so part of what happened is the European nations got together after the First World War and they're like, how are we going to divide up this Ottoman Empire so we all get a piece of the pie? And they were not asking people, where do you guys think that your border should be? Who do you think, what groups go together, what groups don't go together? What do you guys think about this? They were not really asking. How about the Horn of Africa? Anyone have any thoughts there about how they got their borders? Yeah, Caleb.
Yeah, European colonialism.
Yeah, so that again, right? So we had Italy, France, and Britain all taking over parts of the coast. And then Ethiopia in the center being like, no, you're not coming in here. And so a lot of those borders are also kind of resulting from interference from outside of the region. Why does this matter today? Like, it's been a few decades, right? It's been a few decades at least. Why does it matter today? Yeah.
Still affecting the people, the culture. They're different. They have different practices. So it's still affecting them.
Yes. So this is still affecting people. People are still divided from people they feel identified with by these borders, and still grouped together with people they don't feel identified with by these borders. So this is still a problem and it's still a source of conflict. Now, in the aftermath of having all these nations have their borders, they kind of had to make the best of it, right? And so all these different nations in the Middle East and Horn of Africa start building national identities. Why do you guys think that would be something they would want to do, and what are kind of the negative aspects of that? Tell your neighbor. What do y'all think? Why would a nation want to build a national identity? Why does this matter? Why do this? Yes.
Well, I would say, I guess, colonialism and, imperialism left a lot of these countries very weak and, susceptible to outside interference, especially after Europeans left. And so these nations wanted to come back together and be strong again and have people believe in them enough that, there wouldn't be any sort of discontent. So they wanted to build a national identity that their people could sort of take pride in and identify with.
Okay, yes, I think that's definitely part of it. A lot of these countries have been under the rule of a wide variety of empires and powers for a very long time. And so they're wanting to say, okay, can we build our own independent identity, something we can rally around, something that can unite us so we can have peace in our country, so that we can protect our country. I think that's definitely part of it. Any other thoughts on this? Yeah.
Oh, I guess I would just answer the next one.
Mhm.
Really, a national identity at some point, I think, has to wear away some of the cultural distinctness that makes up the groups of the nation, just so they can get along. And when they can't get along, there's a lot of conflict and internal division by trying to enforce this national identity on groups that don't want to abandon or get rid of those distinct cultural features that belong to them.
Yes, yes. So you're kind of getting at the danger of a national identity. In order for a national identity to be strong and to work, other identities have to kind of take a step back. And so groups have to be willing to kind of let that happen. And also, the people who want to build the national identity, as we saw with the Turkey example, sometimes they're going to do that in an aggressive way. That's not the way you should be building your national identity. Let's suppress all other potential identities. Doesn't seem like a good way to go to get your people behind you. So yeah, there's also this kind of negative side to it. Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to take our break until 2:34, and then we're going to come back and continue for a bit longer. There we go. As we've talked about this quarter, the Middle East and Horn of Africa have been dominated by many different empires and powers over time. Some of them are kind of homegrown, some of them are from outside of the region. Down in the 6 and 7 area, I'd like you to see how many you can name. And I think it would probably be the easiest way to do this is to divide them into columns, ancient, medieval, early modern, and modern. That's probably the best way to do this. And then see how many you can name in each category. Feel free to work with your neighbor.
Oh.
There's a little makes them small and possible.
That's meaningful. You should.
Tell your neighbors, see if they got some that you didn't get.
Yeah. She got more, I mean, it's. It looks really well.
Okay, someone yell out for me. What's an ancient empire that had power in this region? Roman Empire. What's another ancient empire?
Committed.
Okay, the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. Yes, absolutely. How about kind of medieval empires? Anyone name one? Yeah? Okay, so the Ottoman Empire, technically they're early modern, but they go back into the 1300s and it's kind of wobbly when medieval starts and ends, so you could make an argument. Other kind of like before the Ottomans, but after the Romans. Yeah, the Byzantine Empire. Yeah. Yes, the Abbasids, the Umayyads. Yes. You got it? So they're definitely running around, absolutely. Early modern, we've already got the Ottomans. Who else other than the Ottomans would be early modern? Yes. Yes, the Safavids and the Mughals. Yes. So yeah, how about modern powers in the region? Yes. So the Mongols, I would probably not say are modern. I would probably say they're kind of impacting the medieval to early modern, like I would probably say that. I would probably say that. Other modern powers in the region. Modern powers in the region. Okay, yeah, Egypt is there. It becomes independent. It's become pretty powerful. All right. Any other modern powers you want to throw in? Yes. Okay, yes. So in the Horn of Africa, we've had the Solomonic dynasty, which is actually a more recent dynasty in Ethiopia. Yes, absolutely. And the kind of early modern to modern period. Absolutely. Any others you guys want to throw in there? Okay. Now, as we think about this, we've had such a long history in this region, such a long history in this region. What do you guys think are the benefits of having many different groups living alongside one another over a long period of time? What's good about that? Tell your neighbor, what are the benefits?
Yeah. It's because they put into a silence. Yeah. It shows that it's like it is. Yeah, it's like one. Yeah.
What do y'all think? What's good about this? What's good about it? Yes.
They would share experience and different practices. Like they will learn from each other. Yeah, they will share their cultures.
Yes, absolutely. So people will share their cultures. They will learn from each other. They will share their experiences. Absolutely. Those things are true. Other benefits. Yes.
Certain instances, it could harbor a atmosphere of tolerance amongst the cultures.
Okay, so this can sometimes lead to an atmosphere of tolerance and appreciation for one another. Absolutely. What can make this difficult sometimes if we think about this kind of long span of history? Yeah. Yeah, we can end up in situations where, we've all lived here for 3,000 years but 2000 years ago, your great great grandfather did something to my great great grandfather, or, like there's an accumulation of baggage, right? In a certain sense, where you're like, okay, this group, we've had sometimes positive history with them, we've sometimes had negative history with them. And sometimes we can focus on the negative history and we can be like, well, we have all this baggage with certain other groups. And this can be very painful and very difficult as we're trying to live together in the region. So I think one of the things that happens here, if you take philosophy classes, they'll tell you this, people will always try to divide the world into an us and a them. It doesn't actually matter how different from you these people are, we'll always try to divide the world. Not that we should, but that we tend to do this. Because an us that's the whole world, we just can't comprehend it. We just can't process it. And so this can end up being really difficult in a region with a long history, because you're like, well, 500 years ago we had beef with these people, and 100 years ago we had beef with these people, and 10 years ago we were in a conflict with these people. And if you focus on those conflicts, things could become really difficult. So in this context, I'll just pull up this story that we all read together back at the beginning of the quarter, which I'm just bringing up this specific story because we all read it together. There are other stories from other traditions I could have picked. But let's just remind ourselves what's in this story for a second. So this is a story that Jesus told, right, in the New Testament. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and he passed by on the other side of the road. So too a Levite. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expenses you have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Do you guys remember when we talked about this story? Did the Jews and the Samaritans get along? Did they like each other? As groups during this time period, they did not get along. They had a lot of conflicts over the past 300 years. They really did not look well at each other. They did not get along well. There were sometimes armed conflicts. There was a lot of kind of verbal denigration of one another. It was not super great. But here in this story, who is the person who acts kindly toward this beaten up Jew? The Samaritan. Yeah. And Jesus comes in and he's like, go and do likewise. Be like the Samaritan. So what do you guys think the point of this story is, if we're thinking about this kind of context of long and sometimes painful histories? What could one of the messages Jesus is trying to get across here be? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Everybody.
What do you guys think? What might the moral of the story be in this context? Why am I bringing it up? Yeah.
Is saying don't judge a person based on where they're from. Even people who you consider different from you are like capable of charity, and so you should also be charitable to those people that maybe you went on to dislike them or fear them. you should like show like kindness and charity.
Okay, yes, absolutely. So it's really this call to look at people as individuals. Like this Samaritan looked at this poor beaten up guy and he's not like, "Oh, that's a Jew. We have all this baggage with them." Instead, he's like, "Here's a human being who needs help." And he identified him first that way and was helping him. So, like the Jews and the Samaritans, they genuinely had really severe, unpleasant conflict with one another. They genuinely had significant trauma about one another and baggage with one another. But here, the Samaritan is like, you know what? I'm going to look at this guy first as just a human being who needs my help. So this is really difficult, right? This is really difficult for all of us to do. But I think it's something that if we don't want the world to completely burn up and fall apart, this is something we have to aspire to. Anyway, that's my moralizing for the day. Okay. So one last thing for you to discuss with your neighbor. What has been kind of the impact in the world of the peoples of the Middle East and Horn of Africa? What are some of the contributions they have made to the world? Tell your neighbor what you think. If you're not sure how to answer that, you can think about if the people of the Middle East and Horn of Africa didn't exist, what would be missing from our world? Tell your neighbor what you think.
Regions,
There's a lot of stuff that out there.
There's lots of it. A lot of. Yeah. Yeah, it's the locations, I think. Yeah.
What do you guys think? What are some of the contributions? What would we be missing? Yeah.
You know, a lot of our understanding of medicine wouldn't exist. You know, we like the Middle East produced some of the first hospitals and you know medical schools, and so a lot of medical disciplines would probably not exist, or at least be stunted because of the discoveries that were made in this region at various time periods.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So medicine and a lot of the STEM disciplines go farther back in the Middle East than they do anywhere else in the world. Like the Greeks get credit for a lot of stuff that was originally from the Middle East. That's definitely something that's going on here. What else? Other contributions? Yeah.
The right.
Yep. So we have a lot of contributions to human rights that came out of here, not only in the religious traditions, but even in things like the Decree of Cyrus on the Cyrus cylinder. Yes, absolutely. Other contributions. To throw another one out there, we wouldn't have Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. I think we'd have a very different world if we never had any of those religions. We'd probably still all be polytheistic, which would be interesting. Yeah.
I mean, like the Horn of Africa also produced many contributions to these religions, and it wouldn't be the same. For example, in the Horn of Africa, Bilal came from there, and he was the first muezzin. So I think that that's important. It's an important part of Islamic tradition everywhere nowadays. So if not for people like him, there would not be like as much of a rich and varied tradition in any of these religions.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa have had a long impact on these different religions and their traditions and their kind of larger conversations. Those are things we often don't learn about, but it's actually very important historically. Someone give me one more contribution. There are a lot of technological contributions we could throw out there, a lot of things about architecture, math. Math came out of the Middle East. Lots of things came from the Middle East. Okay, so as we kind of work towards closing here, we have a thinking question on the back of your handout. So I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but as part of my journey to here, I used to teach middle school, especially seventh grade. I taught seventh grade for a number of years. And most schools that address that age in the USA, they don't learn much of anything about the Middle East or Horn of Africa. I made my students learn things, but then I got in trouble with my boss for teaching outside of their requirements. Anyway, so I want you guys to imagine for a moment. I want you to imagine for a moment you're going to visit a class of 11 to 14-year-olds and you're going to help teach a unit related to the Middle East and or the Horn of Africa. So I want you to think about that for a second. What would you most want these kids to know or experience about the Middle East and or Horn of Africa? And if you could read one of our readings from this class with them, which one would you pick and why? So go ahead and jot down what you think on the back of the page there. Again, you're free to talk to your neighbor about this.
Like, they like a lot of news stories and
Okay. Um, Does anyone have a favorite reading they think the 11 to 14-year-old should read? Yeah.
I think, what we read of the sort of the new rendition of Aladdin and his story with the island as well, in the unit, or for the lecture about, the 1001 Nights was, probably a reading that I would choose because I think it shows like the storytelling traditions and the way that carried over to the modern day and became sort of a political commentary. I thought that was really revealing about how like the traditions are like sort of like carried over, but also changed to like suit the current day. And I also think it's important to see, because there are so many headlines nowadays that don't really give you the full history. I think it's important to see how people from the Middle East and Horn of Africa are interpreting their own political situation and, you know, the state of their own countries and their people. So I think that that's a really revealing read.
Okay. Yeah, I like that one a lot too. Anyone else have a favorite? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think funny and like it has some morals that students would love like to listen and learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think they would. I also think they would enjoy Joha. And the Joha stories are told all over the Middle East by so many different people groups. It would be fun to kind of look at how those stories travel around too. Okay. Any final questions or thoughts anyone has? Okay. Before I dismiss you, I would like to take a very quick survey of you guys. Basically, everybody close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Show me on a scale of 1 to 5 how useful you thought having a course wrap-up day was. I will not be offended by anything you say. If you thought this was really not helpful and you thought it was just rehashing stuff you already know, give me a 1 on your hand. If you really liked it, give me a 5. And if you're anywhere in between, give me some in-between number of fingers. I guarantee I will not remember who put up what fingers, so there's absolutely no shade. Everyone, show me on your hands on a scale of 1 to 5. How useful did you feel class today was? Okay, everybody put your hands down. You can open your eyes. Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback. That will help me for next time. All right. I will see y'all on Wednesday for the culture fair. Please let me know if you have any questions.